Hi, everybody. Today's book that I'm going to share with you is another book about William Carlos Williams. So remember last week we read this one, A River of Words, that was kind of all about his whole life and where he got ideas for a bunch of his different poems. Well, this week's book is another non-fiction book, and it's called 16 Words, William Carlos Williams and the Red Wheelbarrow. And if you count, you'll notice that the Red Wheelbarrow poem has 16 words in it. So this book is all about just that one poem and kind of where he got that idea from. And I know quite a few of you mentioned this past week that you remember the Red Wheelbarrow poem being mentioned here and that it was one of your favorites. So this is a book called 16 Words. So this is a non-fiction book, sort of like a biography of a poem instead of a person. How interesting, right? So here we go. 16 words. Look out the window. What do you see? If you are Dr. William Carlos Williams, you see a wheelbarrow, a drizzle of rain, chickens scratching in the damp earth. Perhaps Dr. Williams is waiting to read a thermometer. Maybe he has just written a prescription, or if his young patient feels up to a game, maybe he has shuffled a deck of playing cards. He looks up, looks out, and notices. So remember last week in the book we read, we learned about how back in the olden days when he was a doctor, that he would visit his patients at their homes. So there he is, visiting a sick boy at his home and looking out the window. The wheelbarrow belongs to Dr. Thaddeus Marshall. Dr. Williams is the Marshall's family doctor. Day after day, Mr. Marshall picks up his tools, a watering can, a rake, and a trowel. He cares for his garden at 11 Elm Street in Rutherford, New Jersey. Remember last week we learned that's where he grew up, Rutherford, New Jersey. Stepping around his chickens, he turns the soil, pulls weeds, harvests greens. He plucks vegetables and carries them to his wheelbarrow. Then he lifts the wheelbarrow's handles and balances it on its single tire. His son Milton shoos the chickens away. And then Mr. Marshall pushes his wheelbarrow through the streets of Rutherford. He depends on the wheelbarrow to carry the vegetables he sells to his neighbors. Remember that word. He depends on the wheelbarrow. Remember that word from the poem? Day after day, Dr. Williams also picks up his tools: a stethoscope, syringes, a blood pressure cuff, a thermometer, and more. He packs his black doctor's bag and lifts it by its two handles. He cares for patients in his office at 9 Ridge Road. He cares for patients at their homes. He bandages wounds. He checks temperatures and listens to heartbeats. He treats children with measles and chickenpox. So there were a lot fewer vaccines back then, so kids got sick with a lot more things back then. He brings many babies, at least 3,000, into this world. It was also much more common for people to give birth at home back then too, so he did a lot of giving birth to babies at home. Dr. Williams depends, there's that word again, he depends on his doctor's bag to carry the tools he needs. Along with his stethoscope and syringes, he carries a pen for writing prescriptions, a pen for crafting poems. Writing poems brings Dr. Williams joy, and he fits in his writing around his doctoring. If he's in the office, he uses time between appointments to tap on his typewriter. He writes about trees, a fire engine, cats, and plums. Remember his plum poem? That's my favorite. He chooses the words for his poetry as carefully as he examines his patients. If he's making a house call, he scribbles poems on his prescription pad. What do we see there in the picture? Do you notice who that is? He writes about his town and the people who live there. Dr. Williams visits 11 Elm Street, where Mr. Marshall and his wife Alice raised their sons Milton, Hiram, Victor, Leon, and Thaddeus Jr. Perhaps he is there to set a broken arm or soothe a high fever. Perhaps he is caring for Mr. Marshall, who has been ill. Dr. Williams pauses. He looks out the bedroom window toward the garden. He sees rain falling. It falls on the chickens, scrabbling in the dirt, their feathers dingy white. It falls on Mr. Marshall's wheelbarrow, red and weathered, sturdy and strong. The rain streaks the window, soaks the garden, drips into the roots of Mr. Marshall's vegetable plants, helping them grow. Dr. Williams grasps his pen. He begins to write. He writes of what he notices: the wheelbarrow, the chickens, the rain, the yard. He writes a poem using just 16 words. Those 16 words do not describe Mr. Marshall's chicken coop or the train rattling nearby. They do not describe Mr. Marshall hefting that wheelbarrow or the aches and pains he suffers from stooping to care for his plants. They do not describe Mr. Marshall's life of work or caring or love. But somehow, the words say just that. And here's the poem. You ready? So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Did you count the words? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 16 words. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. There we go. And there is the author's note there again, and you know I always love to read the author's note. It says here that this is true. Mr. Marshall and his wheelbarrow inspired Dr. and Pulitzer Prize-winning poet William Carlos Williams to write his most famous poem, The Red Wheelbarrow, published in 1923. This was William Carlos Williams' favorite poem of all the poems he wrote. And this is what William Carlos Williams said about Marshall, the man with the wheelbarrow. I liked that man and his son Milton almost as much. I suppose my affection for the old man somehow got into the writing. And then he says, sometimes when I write, I don't want to say anything. I just want to present it. But just as someone can look and notice one thing while someone else sees another thing, we all read poems a different way. So you might see something different when you read that Red Wheelbarrow poem. But this is just one story about what he saw when he wrote that poem. So there we go. That's just a little bit more information about a poem with 16 words by William Carlos Williams. I hope you liked it.